Flair to Harley Race to Triple H to John Cena to Hulk Hogan. Everybody will be talking about it, and probably wrestlers we haven't seen or heard from in years. DDP, Jake the Snake Roberts, some of the greatest wrestling psychologists of all time. Bret the Hitman Hart himself probably would have time to comment on it. And just the psychology that we would see coming from The Undertaker and Sting, just their characters and how they've stood out for years. With professional wrestling, this is a match that needs to happen, not to mention the money that could be generated from this and the attention it will garner throughout social media, as if Sting's induction into the Hall of Fame hasn't already gotten enough significant attention about things like who's going to be inducting him, what could come with Sting's induction if we've seen the last of Sting wrestling for WWE without having that career-defining moment in WWE and having reached the pinnacle of his career, never having performed on the grandest stage of them all. And I remember when Sting performed for the first time ever at WrestleMania and how nervous he was from the backstage footage that the network was showing about how Sting was so nervous. I mean, how could you not be nervous going out in front of over 90,000 fans and wrestling at the biggest wrestling event of all time? You're Sting, you're an icon, you've done it all, but you've never wrestled at WrestleMania, so who can blame Sting for being as nervous as what he was and facing a name like Triple H, a man who you hated for forever, and now you're finally having the opportunity to create with in front of over 90,000 fans in Levi Stadium. I mean, it was incredible seeing it all come to be and just how it all happened and how it all unfolded and what the result was. I know I was really frustrated over how Sting was treated, and I still am pissed off over how Sting was treated, because I think with Sting getting to this pinnacle, never having performed on the grandest stage of them all, being so nervous, I really was hoping that Sting was going to win, and he was going to go down in history as one of the greatest wrestling legends of all time. Now, with that loss to Triple H, even with that, and the loss to Seth Rollins in his only championship match in WWE he ever had the chance to be given, do you think Sting is still going to go down in history for being a legend? I think the answer to that question, based off all the big names he's wrestled, no matter if you're talking about the Giant, of course, the Big Show, Bret the Hitman Hart, Goldberg, Diamond Dallas Page, Hulk Hogan. I mean, with all the legends that he's wrestled on an incredible list, on an incredible resume, along with all the championships he's won over the span of 25 years, I think that question is yes, emphatically, that Sting will be remembered and go down in history for being one of the greatest wrestling legends of all time. And if you go back even further, the Bleach Blonde Sting, who I was also a huge fan of, had great matches against the likes of Vader and some of the top names in World Championship Wrestling, again demonstrating his loyalty. But my favorite stage of Sting's career had to have been when he was the Crow, and he was trying to change his image, and obviously changing it for the better when the NWO were calling the shots, running World Championship Wrestling the way they saw fit, apparently. And then here comes Sting from the Raptors. He assaults the NWO, and then we have some of the greatest feuds and World Championship Wrestling derived from it. We have Sting, of course, with this darker side being showed. So many wrestlers were intimidated by Sting, and how could you not have been intimidated by that Crow Sting? I mean, you know Sting for being a bleach blonde character for years, in the early years of his wrestling career, when he was only young, trying to make a name for himself. Once that was established, here comes this entirely different, this darker Sting that changes the complexion and the entire direction of professional wrestling for years. And this is why this argument has been raised for so many years since Sting, of course, metamorphosized into the Crow. Whether or not Sting should go into either the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame or the WWE Hall of Fame. And now, after all these years, it's a realization. And how do wrestling fans feel about this? What is your reaction? Get in on the conversation and let me know in the comments of this video at Jonathan Clarke 22, because I know there are people out there, they do exist, they are fans of Sting. There are people out there that probably don't agree with Sting going into the Hall of Fame, but how can you not be excited for a legend as big as this going into the Hall of Fame for the first time? We were excited when we found out that people like the Ultimate Warrior and Bret the Hitman Hart were going into the Hall of Fame for the first time in years, because of how much confliction was created from how they had been treated in professional wrestling, how they had animosity towards different people in the WWE, all the controversy surrounding their characters. We were even excited when Stone Cold Steve Austin was inducted by Vince McMahon himself, but I don't think we've ever been as excited to see a legend like Sting going into the Hall of Fame, because we still have to answer the question of who's going to be inducting Sting. I think they're going to leave that for us as a surprise as we get closer to the night before WrestleMania and all these legends take their rightful place amongst the gods. Who would have ever thought years ago that Sting would be being inducted into the Hall of Fame after doing so little for WWE, but doing an incredible amount for his entire wrestling career? And I think that had a lot to do with the animosity. And there were people asking me, what was my opinion on how Sting was treated at WrestleMania. To be honest with you, quite frankly, I thought it was a bunch of bullshit. I thought Sting should have won one over on Triple H. I mean, Triple H was a guy at that point who had done everything he was capable of having done as a wrestler. He made a successful transition, as we recently heard, from the new 14-time world champion from the ring into the board of directors, and he became one of the most successful businessmen in the history of WWE, saying now he's going to be champion for as long as he wants to be champion, which also leaves me with the impression that we're either going to be seeing Sting versus The Undertaker in somewhat of a number one contenders match, and then Sting shows up the night after WrestleMania after Triple H beats Roman Reigns with all the controversy and challenges Triple H for Sting's redemption. That could be where Sting sees the pinnacle of his career too, not forgetting about that. If Triple H doesn't do that, then obviously he'll go on to face someone like AJ Styles or debuting Samoa Joe or returning Kurt Angle, something along those lines, because it seems like WWE are recruiting TNA wrestlers now, and Sting, with the recruitment of all these TNA wrestlers, could factor in there somehow also, even if it is AJ Styles versus Triple H or Triple H versus a debuting Samoa Joe from NXT, of course, with history with TNA wrestling like Sting has. So there's a lot of ways this can go, but to be honest with you, I don't think we've seen the last of Sting in WWE, especially with how he has yet to see this career-defining moment. He has had career-defining moments before, but they have all existed outside of WWE, so how can you go without recognizing Sting not having a career-defining moment in WWE against the likes of Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, The Undertaker? Name Sting has expressed a desire to want to wrestle, and if you're Sting and you're WWE and you're two different parties, you're not going to say no to one of the biggest icons in wrestling history, are you? You may say no to Sting winning one over on WWE because there's no way Vince and Triple H are going to let WCW win over the WWE, especially after all these years, and having this grudge be very noticeable. And with that controversial YouTube video and all Sting's comments posted back in 2005, a video that's still with me in my mind that I'll never ever forget, because of the controversy that's been always discussed about that video that was posted in 2005, how Sting said he'd never work for the McMahons or WWE, and now he's gone back on his word. Now all of a sudden, a man who said he'd never work for WWE is now working for WWE. Just imagine the ratings they first got when Sting arrived in WWE, and all this became a realization. I had to slap myself in the face several times before I realized and came to terms with the fact that Sting, before I ever accepted that Sting had arrived in WWE, but it is finally happening, and now we have something actually worth talking about and to be excited for professional wrestling. And if you're a wrestling fan, if you're someone who is not excited about this, then you're not a wrestling fan. But if you're someone who are excited with how Sting's going into the Hall of Fame, then you are truly a die-hard wrestling fan, my friend, and you have something to be proud of outside of the critics, which we have no time for, who say that this should not be happening. You know, Sting should not be going into a Hall of Fame for a company or an organization that he's never worked with before, but it is what it is, and Sting is going in the Hall of Fame. And to be honest with you, I think this has been a long time coming, 15 years in the making over that. And I think that we've waited our whole lives to see moments like these. As wrestling fans, we wait our whole lives to see moments like these. That's probably the best way of putting it out there for you. And I think that after having been a Sting fan for years, which I have been, it's not just something with the novelty of Sting being a part of WWE now, because I've always been a huge fan of people like Shawn Michaels, who was really my first original love when it came to professional wrestling. Shawn Michaels, The Undertaker, Mick Foley, Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, and Sting was in that category. If there ever was a wrestler outside of someone who had never worked for WWE before, it was obviously someone like Sting who I was going to choose because of the psychology of his character and just how he always belonged in a Hall of Fame. And I think the Hall of Fame was obviously built, if I can get away with saying this, for wrestlers like Sting and Ric Flair. And obviously if Ric Flair put Sting in the Hall of Fame, appropriately and very deservingly so. Big Sting fan, really looking forward to this, and the night before WrestleMania is something to be witnessed by all wrestling fans, because if you're someone who's against Sting going in the Hall of Fame, you never were a wrestling fan. But if you're someone who are for Sting going in the Hall of Fame, you are the definition of a die-hard wrestling fan, anything but a mark, my friends, because Sting is deserving of this. This has been a long time coming. We've been waiting 15 years to see it, and now it's finally happening. Reality's slapping us in the face, like it or not. Sting's going in the Hall of Fame, and what is my response to this? It's about fucking time. I'm your host, Jonathan Clarke, and I will talk to you again next week. Like what you hear? Tell us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube.